we often, those of us who are directors, will approach Cal with the play, and Cal will say, "Yeah, that's great. I like your idea, but here, what about this one?" and that's how I came to The Whipping Man.
Well, I'm Steve Sherman, and I am coming to you from Knoxville, Tennessee, the native lands of the Yuchi, Muskogee Creek, and Cherokee nations. John, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and a little bit about this play, The Whipping Man by Matthew Lopez.
Yes, I'm John Sipes. I teach in the theater department at UT, and I'm a regular director at the Clarence Brown Theater. And in 2014, now it seems like ages ago, I directed The Whipping Man with you in it, Steve. And it was a highlight of my time directing here, and remains that way. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about the play. It's a play about the ravages of war, and particularly the Civil War, the ravages on the soul and the heart and the body of a nation. And it's also about the inhumanity and cruelty of slavery, but it's also about the redemptive power of forgiveness, of compassion, and of love and caring for another. So it is a very dark play in many ways, but it has through it streams of light and hopefulness.
Mm-hmm. What drew you to the play when you first read it?
Yes, there were several things. The one that captivated me the most, I think I would have to step back a little bit and just give our listeners a bit of the setting.
Sure.
And the piece is set in Richmond, Virginia, in April of 1865, and I think the opening day of the story is April 13th. This becomes important because on April 12th, the Confederates surrendered at Appomattox, and thus freeing the Southern slaves. Specifically, the play is set in your house, the De Leon's house. And the De Leons are Jewish slave owners. It's important to mention, isn't it, that their faith, and all of the slaves in the household were also Jewish, which is important to mention.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the issues that interested me, and what stems from that. So as I mentioned, we have the surrender of the Confederacy at Appomattox. This is one of the events that is mentioned. Another event that the playwright introduces in the play is the celebration of Passover, which also happens in April. It's a spring event. And Passover is the time when the Jews commemorate their liberation from slavery in Egypt. So the playwright has kind of brilliantly brought these events together, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it had a very sort of personal effect on your character, not on the slaves. And then one really brilliant thing that Lopez does, and brilliant kind of theatrical turn, is that he introduces and depicts a Seder dinner.
Mm-hmm.
In the play. You remember that?
Yeah.
Sure, very well.
Yeah.
And the Seder dinner is a dinner that takes place in the Jewish tradition to celebrate the Jews, the Israelites' liberation from Egypt. And in this particular Seder in our play, we have mostly it was Simon and John, the two slaves, officiating, if you would, this Seder dinner. And it's this wonderful mix of traditional Jewish ritual and a Southern sort of gospel preacher event.
Yeah.
And it was quite beautiful, uplifting. I think it sort of caused all of us in the audience as we were watching to imagine that this play, this rather dark play,
Mm-hmm.
had some essential lightness.
Yeah, it's interesting to have a scene in a play like that where such a ritual is such an important part of it and leading up to the climax. Um, I remember going over a Seder dinner with Neil, who was working in our department at the time, and I just learned so much as an actor in that play about the Civil War and the history, playing a Confederate soldier who came back. And as you said, Lopez just brilliantly ties in the parallels of the slaves fleeing Egypt and slavery here at the end of the Civil War. What were some of the challenges as far as theatricality that you had to kind of solve, the puzzles you had to solve?
Well, in this particular play, there were many. It was, as I mentioned to you, the play, from my point of view, is about the ravages of war.
Mm-hmm.
So Lopez really demanded that we depict some of those events, or some of that horror and destruction. The first would have been in the set. The set was to represent your house, the De Leon house, as after having been bombed and caught on fire. So the designers created this phenomenal set, I felt.
Yeah.
That, it looked as if it was going to tumble down, but fortunately it didn't. And the set represented what was happening in the country at that time.
Yeah.
How it was being destroyed. That was one of the issues. Another was one that you were intimately familiar with, and that was as you enter the set as Caleb, the young Confederate captain, you're wounded.
Yeah.
You have a terrible wound in your leg. And we had to make that as gory as possible, which I think we did. And then the other kind of awful event connected to you was the removal of that leg because it was gangrenous. And I think you can probably speak to some of the description of that.
Well, yeah, and just what I always tell my students now at UT is, it's our jobs as theater artists to be as captivating as possible from the very first moment. In this play and in our production, we hear thunder, we see lightning, we saw rain coming down the windows. Caleb swings the door open, puts pressure on his wounded leg, screams, faints, and Simon comes up to him and points a rifle with a lantern dangling off the end of it before a line is uttered, which I think is one of the greatest openings in a play. As you said, it's a highlight of your directing career. What a fun time it was to act all that out. And I remember when I first read it, I just flew through the pages.
Yeah, and of course we needed to make that moment as realistic as possible. And then, as I said a few moments ago, we learned that leg, your leg, needs to be removed. So, and Lopez demands that we see at least the beginning of that on stage. So we did a great deal of work to make that look gruesome and horrible. And not just for shock effect, but really from my point of view, I wanted the audience to experience viscerally the horror of war and what happens to people.
Yeah.
So we spent a great deal of time on that. And then also, the play is called The Whipping Man. And without going into details, we learned that Simon, the older slave, had been sent to the whipping man many times. And Lopez writes into the play that we need to see the graphic effect of that whipping. So Dave Morrison, the actor playing Simon, at one point lifts his shirt and we see those horrible welts back. And again, I wanted it to look as real as possible so that the audience could feel how cruel and horrible that was.
And the carousel was such a great space for this show because you're so immersed in the environment and you're really up close and personal to those horrors.
That's right. And so I think, that these moments that we just talked about were shocking. Yes, sure. But hopefully they were stirring.
Yeah.
And encourage people to think about these issues that course through the play.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, John, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Steve. It was a real pleasure.
And thank you to the viewers. We will be continuing to discuss the Clarence Brown production of The Whipping Man in the coming weeks. And I hope you're all doing well. Thank you.